welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely fascinating and honestly super relevant to our daily lives: the massive tension between global market efficiency and fundamental human dignity. We live in this incredibly connected world, right? You can buy a t-shirt or a new smartphone from literally anywhere on Earth with a single click. But all that crazy convenience and economic growth brings up a pretty heavy question. When our global economy is so laser-focused on getting the absolute cheapest market price, what actually happens to the inherent value of the human beings making those goods? Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the philosophy of human dignity, then look at enshrining dignity into law. After that, we'll hit the global trade paradox, exploitation in the supply chain, frameworks for ethical trade, and finally, wrap things up with reforming the global market. Section 1. The philosophy of human dignity. Immanuel Kant's revolutionary idea. To really grasp where our modern idea of human dignity comes from, we actually have to jump all the way back to the 18th century and look at the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. The guy literally changed the world with this one brilliant distinction. He drew a hard, strict line between objects and people. Basically, objects have a relative value, what he'd call a market price, meaning, they can be swapped out, traded, or replaced. But human beings? Completely different. We have an absolute inner value. We don't have a price tag, we have dignity. And because that dignity is absolute, you literally cannot measure it, quantify it, or trade it away just to get a cheaper cost of doing business. So how does this actually play out in real life? Well, Kant came up with a moral law called the categorical imperative. It basically says we always have to treat humans as an end in themselves, and never just as a means to an end. Why? Because unlike an animal acting on pure instinct, or a machine just running some code, humans have autonomy. We actually have the rational capacity to choose our own moral ends. And that very ability to create moral value, that's exactly what gives us our absolute worth. You simply can't treat a person like a tool or a replaceable gear in a machine just to get a job done. Moving to Section 2, enshrining dignity into law, from philosophy to international governance. Kant's ideas were powerful, sure, but for a long time they were really just, philosophy. It unfortunately took the horrific atrocities of the Second World War to force the world to take those high-minded Enlightenment concepts and hammer them into hard, binding international law. It's a huge conceptual leap when you look at the timeline. Back in 1785, Kant publishes his groundwork. But it isn't until 1948, right in the wake of total global devastation, that the UN adopts the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, setting a universal baseline for things like liberty and equal pay. Boom. The very next year, Germany creates its Basic Law. Fast forward to 1966, and the ICCPR is adopted, legally prohibiting stuff like forced labor. We went from abstract philosophical musings to a concrete global legal architecture, all designed to make sure humans are never again reduced to mere objects. A really striking example of this in action is Article 1 of the German Basic Law, which states human dignity is inviolable. That is the supreme constitutional principle in Germany. It binds absolutely everything: legislative, executive, judicial actions, the whole shebang. It essentially means the state has an absolute duty to stop anything that impairs human dignity. This is Kant's concept of inner value, dragged right out of the textbook and directly into the courtroom. Section 3. The global trade paradox, the dual impact of a connected economy. Now here is where things get incredibly complicated. How do these mid-20th century human rights laws actually hold up to the ultimate stress test? And by that, I mean the hyper-connected, hyper-efficient modern global marketplace. Because international trade is a massive double-edged sword. On one hand, it's this incredible engine for good, driving job creation, massively reducing extreme poverty, and advancing gender equality by bringing marginalized groups into the formal workforce. But on the exact same token, that relentless cutthroat drive for lower costs can completely undermine those exact same rights, leading to forced labor, the devastation of indigenous environments, and vast digital privacy violations. To really wrap our heads around the positive side of that paradox, just look at this number, 6%. Back in the early 90s, nearly 70% of Vietnam's population was living in poverty. 70%! But after they rolled out their export-oriented Doi Moi reforms and really integrated into the global market, especially in textiles and agriculture, that poverty rate absolutely plummeted to under 6% by 2018. If you ever wanted to see the life-changing, sheer power of job creation through global trade, that right there is it. And we see a similar story with gender equality. Take the Bangladesh garment industry, for example. An astonishing 80% of that workforce is women. For a lot of them, this export-driven industry is their very first shot at formal employment and real financial independence. But at what cost? This perfectly highlights the paradox we're talking about. Trade empowers millions of women with independent incomes, absolutely, but it simultaneously places them in industries that are scrutinized for terribly poor and, frankly, sometimes dangerous working conditions. Section 4. Exploitation in the supply chain. The human cost of market efficiency. We really can't discuss this without facing the darker reality of global supply chains. When the ultimate goal of the market is ruthless efficiency and rock-bottom consumer prices, human dignity is directly in the crosshairs. Think about the 2013 Rana Plaza factory collapse in Bangladesh, where over 1,000 workers were killed. That wasn't just some abstract philosophical failure. It was a devastating, real-world disaster completely fueled by the global demand for fast fashion. It showed the entire world exactly what happens when workers at the bottom of a supply chain are treated just as a means to an end, a means to cheaper clothing, instead of as human beings whose safety and lives possess absolute worth. In this kind of exploitation, it expands way beyond the factory floor. The relentless pursuit of agricultural profit is driving massive deforestation down in the Amazon for commodities like soy, beef, and timber. This is literally displacing indigenous groups like the Yanomami and Kayapo, stripping away their ancestral lands and right to health. Meanwhile, jumping over to the digital economy, we have trade agreements like the CPTPP facilitating these massive cross-border data flows. Now sure, that's fantastic for e-commerce, but it creates huge loopholes for mass surveillance and the exploitation of personal data. It essentially treats our personal digital identities as just another cheap commodity to be traded across borders. Section 5. Frameworks for ethical trade. Balancing commerce and human rights. So how do we actually fix this? Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing how these lofty international treaties actually show up in modern trade deals. We've got those foundational baselines, like the UDHR and the ICCPR. But check out the USMCA, the trade pact between the US, Mexico, and Canada. Its Chapter 23 has this rapid response mechanism for labor violations, and it's not just talk. It actually forces tangible, on-the-ground labor reforms that have led to real improvements in union rights and wages in Mexico. You see a similar thing with the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement, which sets up binding labor and environmental standards monitored by independent committees. We are finally starting to tie economic access directly to ethical behavior. Section 6. Reforming the global market. Solutions for a sustainable future. Those frameworks are a great start, but to truly make sure international trade supports rather than exploits human rights, we need some serious structural reforms. Here are the actionable steps experts are recommending. First up, human rights clauses in trade agreements can't just be symbolic anymore. They literally have to be binding with real financial penalties if a country doesn't comply. Second, we absolutely must mandate corporate due diligence. Laws like the UK Modern Slavery Act are a great example. They force companies to be completely transparent about their supply chains, making them legally on the hook for identifying and preventing exploitation, even overseas. And third, we've got to empower global collaboration and grassroots advocacy. Groups like the Clean Clothes Campaign act as these vital independent watchdogs, making sure the workers most affected by these trade practices actually have a voice. All of this brings us right back to Kant's original philosophical challenge. Next time you look at the device you're watching this on or the clothes hanging in your closet, ask yourself, does our current global economy treat human beings as ends in themselves, possessing an absolute priceless dignity? Or are we allowing the system to treat them merely as a means to a cheaper market price? It's a tough question, but it's one we absolutely have to answer if we want the future of global trade to be not just prosperous, but truly ethical. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this leaves you with something powerful to think about today.